What's going on, everyone? My name is Jake. This is where I talk capes, and today we're going to talk about something. We're going to talk about Joker, Folie, Deux. We're going to talk about Jongleur 2. The Joker, baby. It's the Joker. I'm going to talk about that movie because I went to go see that movie a few days ago. Today is Tuesday the 8th, which means on Saturday the 5th I went to go see Joker. So I've had a few days to think about it. I went to go see Megalopolis on Sunday. That was worse. So that's one nice thing to say about Joker. It was just a thoroughly confusing movie. Now, if we watched my last video about Joker, then you know my thoughts on that movie are clear. It's very clearly a well-made movie, the first one at least anyway. It's obviously a very well-done movie, but it falls flat in many ways, in my opinion. It's not a comic book movie. It fundamentally doesn't understand what Joker is or what Joker's meant to be, and it doesn't truly understand or appreciate or even necessarily like the medium in which it exists. So I have a few problems with this movie and the first one in general, but we're here to talk about this movie because this movie came out and it's bombing. It's made less money than Morbius right now. I think maybe less than Madam Web on its opening weekend too, maybe. It's possibly on track to make less money. Or it opened with less than the Marvels as well, which spawned a million and one think pieces about why we shouldn't have women in our comic book movies. But this isn't going to happen because it's the Joker, I guess. But it's not set to make a lot of money. And I think the fairly negative word of mouth is going to be a large reason for that. And that's not to say that this movie had bad ideas. I actually think conceptually this movie is rather interesting. The way this movie presents itself is more of a sort of response to the first Joker as opposed to a sequel. Obviously it follows the events and it is a sequel in terms of a narrative effort, but it is a completely different movie and it treats itself as such. I think essentially torpedoing your own movie to make a point to the people who completely missed the point of the first one and maybe got into it a little bit too much and maybe saw something of themselves in Arthur. And listen, let's just not skirt around it. The first Joker is like as a movie for incels. Incels fucking love that movie. They love it. They see themselves representing this man that society's forgot, and he stands up against society, and everyone loves him for it. And it created a very toxic idea to many people. And placed this very toxic idea in their head of a lot of things. There were a lot of people who saw that movie and saw a reflection of themselves and felt bad for the character of Arthur. Not in the way that you kind of should feel bad for the character of Arthur, but they're like, he was right actually, and we should do all this and incite riots and stuff. And so the culture of Joker and the reputation of Joker kind of preceded itself and morphed into something and was co-opted and basically adopted by a certain group of people who I can imagine that Warner Brothers and Todd Phillips and Joaquin Phoenix weren't particularly excited about them kind of latching to this movie. So this movie is a direct response to that, and to be honest, it's kind of the only way that you really can follow that movie up. I don't think that movie needed to be followed up whatsoever, but it made $1 billion, so it was obviously always going to get a follow-up. So to make this movie as a sort of direct response to the people who see it as one of the most important works of the 21st century and see it as this thing where they feel seen and reflected and respected by, when they are completely missing the point, and in doing so it spurs on these harmful behaviours and mindsets and attitudes. I really appreciate this movie for taking that chance to sort of take aim at the people who have latched onto themselves in a negative way, and take aim at the people who see this movie for something that it isn't, and who think this movie is praising and allowing that behaviour to continue and normalising it. So I appreciate that. I do appreciate the fact that it looked at the culture it created and went, this is bad, so let's actively now make this movie where the Joker is a fucking loser. And, spoiler, a lot of his followers turn on him at one point. I think that is an incredible step to take, and realistically the only responsible step that this movie could take following that. However, for that to fully work, the movie has to be good and interesting, and the movie is neither of those things. So it is a bold and appreciated step, but it's ultimately a step towards nothing. It's ultimately a step in the direction of a good idea without becoming a good idea, without maturing into a good idea and a good representation of what this movie could and probably should be. That's not to say this movie isn't without its bright spots. I think Brendan Gleeson is fucking incredible in this movie. Brendan Gleeson is unbelievable in this movie. He's probably the most memorable thing in this movie for me. He's not a good person in it, but he's the way Brendan Gleeson always is. You can't take your eyes off him. He's just absolutely electric. I love Brendan Gleeson. He's one of my favourite actors of all time. I think he's one of the best and I don't necessarily want to say underrated actors working, because everyone who knows Brendan Gleeson knows he's an absolute powerhouse, but he kind of, maybe kind of gets not necessarily lost in the shuffle, but in a movie where you see Brendan Gleeson, he's next to like Colin Farrell in The Banshees of Inisherin, and Colin Farrell is just amazing in that movie, robbed for an Oscar for that movie. Again, in a film like In Bruges, he's also there next to Ralph Fiennes and Colin Farrell, and he obviously shines in those movies, but he's not kind of the main focus of attention. And he isn't in this, but he absolutely steals the show in this. I think every time that Brendan Gleeson is on the screen in this movie, I am just enthralled by his performance. It's electric, it is magnetic, it is fantastic, it is everything that Brendan Gleeson is, typically. I think he's amazing. So that's probably my favourite thing about this movie. I also think Lady Gaga is fun sometimes, not all the time, but I think Lady Gaga is mostly fun and mostly, considering what she's doing with the material, I don't think it's a necessarily good or interesting or overall gripping script, but I think with the material that she's given, she's mostly good to maybe sometimes great in this movie. But that's kind of really all I have to say about this movie. I think those are the only three consistently good things in this film, for me anyway. And before I get into spoilers, which we will dedicate a section, the back half of this video, to spoilers if you've not seen the movie yet, I don't necessarily think that... Okay, fuck it, I'm going to give one spoiler here, but it's not really a spoiler. The idea that it's like a movie musical, which was touted early on, and then everyone got real mad about that, and then they stopped promoting that as much, but it was obviously announced and kind of promoted when it first was announced, we heard that it was going to be a movie musical. The idea that it's a movie musical and you get in Lady Gaga is good, but then you don't really you don't really make it a movie musical, because it's weird. It's a jukebox musical, so which means all the songs in it are songs that already exist. It's not an original. It's not an original list of songs. It's like I guess typically your jukebox musicals would be things like an All Shook Up, which is all about Elvis, or like the Jersey Boys and stuff like that. But this is all kind of like old Hollywoody show tunes kind of stuff. But they don't really sing. Now there's some numbers that clearly happen within the Joker's mind, and they're fun. The courtroom one's quite fun. I like the Hotel Arkham stage play one. I quite like that. But a lot of the time they're maybe having they'll be having a conversation. Let me pick a song. What song have I been listening to right now? I've been listening to Javelin by Rizzle Kicks a lot right now. So imagine that Javelin by Rizzle Kicks is in this movie, and the Joker just goes, well, we are javeling our troubles through the air. And that's like it. And you maybe hear like a little bit of piano in the background. Sometimes you'll speak it in the cadence of the song. Sometimes you'll maybe kind of lift his voice a little bit to match. But it's mostly just him talking half a verse of a song, like speaking the words whilst the music gently plays behind it. It's very confusing and very odd. There are a few numbers that are like quite fun, but it never really leans into the concept enough. It kind of feels like all the ideas that it had when they found out they were going to piss people off, they decided, we're still going to do these, but we're going to do them less, which makes them infinitely less interesting and makes the swing infinitely less impactful. because I guess they're trying to please everyone, even though the point of the movie is specifically to hold a mirror up to the impact and legacy of the first movie. So I don't know why they thought having a couple all singing, all dancing tunes is gonna be a step too far. But they never really go fully in with the concept of the movie musical, and I think that does hold this movie back in general. So the kind of plot of the movie is, we know it's a courtroom drama. Basically, it starts off with Arthur being cross-examined by his attorney, his public defender, and various doctors to just see if he is going to be deemed fit to stand trial, or if they can prove that the Joker is two separate personalities, and they basically want to get an insanity plea. And at the start of the movie, there's another good bit actually. There's a sort of Looney Tunes style cartoon to open up the movie, which kind of is the idea. It kind of deals with the idea of the second darker personality. The Joker, is that Arthur? Is Arthur all one person and he's aware of what he's doing, or is there this split where because of his traumatic childhood that it does fracture and the Joker isn't Arthur? That's kind of the main crux of the story, and it's the courtroom drama, and it's just trying to see if he will go to jail and will be sentenced to death, or if he will, be given the insanity plea. And it kind of doesn't work, because then when he's in Arkham, he meets Harley, who then just goes by Lee for the whole movie, because once again, this is a shame to be a comic book movie, even though it's not a comic book movie. You just call her Lee, and he meets Lee, and Lee is like, I'm in love with you, you're the Joker, baby, we're gonna live forever and have a life together. And I'll deal with that in spoilers, but the idea that he and she seemingly believe that not only will he not be sentenced to death for that murder he did on live television, but that if he is deemed insane and can't go and be executed and has to live his life out in an asylum and in a psychiatric unit, she is there like, yeah, you're not gonna go to jail, and then you're also not gonna go there, you're gonna actually be proven innocent for that murder that you did on TV, and then we're gonna leave and have a life. And I just don't think that works, because maybe Arthur can believe that, but why would anyone else sort of believe that anything other than him spending the rest of his life locked up, whether that be in a hospital or a prison? Why does anyone in this movie have any belief that there is another option? Catherine Keener plays his public defender, and she is absolutely fantastic in this movie. She's brilliant in this movie. Catherine Keener's brilliant in everything, but she's like the only one in this movie. Catherine Keener kind of serves as like a proxy for the audience, because every time that Lee gets in his ear, she's like, no, you either die in the electric chair or you be medicated and live in a hospital forever because you shot Robert De Niro on television. And it's really frustrating when any other character's acting like those aren't the only two options. And then on the other side, the man prosecuting Arthur is Harvey Dent. And Harvey Dent is introduced right at the start of the movie. And we're like, oh, that's Harvey Dent, that's Two-Face, that's comics, that's comic books, baby, this is a comic book movie. We hear the name Harvey Dent and we see Harvey Dent and we see that Harvey Dent is prosecuting this, and we know that there's going to be a morph into there's a Harley here and all these things, and Joker's got all these supporters because everyone loves him, and we assume that we're going to see the inciting incident into Harvey's Two-Face. And once again, this movie not only doesn't understand that it's a comic book movie, but actively fucking hates the fact that it's a comic book movie. That's all I'll say in the non-spoiler section. I didn't like this movie. I didn't like it at all. I thought it was a bad movie. I thought it was an interesting concept and an interesting way to follow up the first one, but I also don't like that movie. I don't think that's a bad movie. I just don't like that movie. We also heard the rumours that WB refused to screen test this, which kind of shows, because it's an absolute fucking mess. I've never seen a movie make so many bizarre decisions. At one point, I'll just say this is another light spoiler. So Joker, or Arthur, fires his public defender to defend himself, and then when it goes back to him in the courtroom, It's like going around the courtroom and you see like the judge is setting up and Harvey's getting his notes in order and the jury are shuffling in and the people watching are shuffling in and the cameramen are there, and then it just cuts to Joaquin Phoenix in full Joker makeup, in the Joker suit, in the red suit, just at the bench ready to defend himself like, I'm Joker, and it doesn't give any like build up to it. We don't see him in Arkham painting his face. It just fucking hard cuts to him in full Joker, being like, I'm ready to spend a day being a lawyer. And it may be the funniest thing I've ever seen, and it's not meant to be funny, but I pissed myself laughing. I like that bit of the movie. It's a bad movie. No, it's a bad movie. It's not a good movie. I wouldn't recommend it at all. I would recommend if you have an unlimited card. If you have a Cineworld unlimited card like me, I would recommend going to see this movie, because I didn't technically pay money to go see this movie. Or if someone wants to buy you a ticket for this movie, go see it. I'd wait till it's on streaming. I'd wait till you can get it at home for cheaper. Rent it for £3 on Amazon. Like, I'd recommend that. I didn't like this movie. Right, well, we talk spoilers. Let's talk spoilers. So when we first meet Lee, Arthur goes to the singing. There's like a singing class in Arkham for the lower security people, and they meet Lee. And Lee obviously starts picking at him and spins him this web that she grew up in the same neighbourhood as him and all these things. And then they go watch a movie together. She starts a fire. They pretend they're going to escape or something. Joker goes in the hole. Joker goes into solitary. And then he wakes up one day and she's there. And she's like, I'll bribe a guard to let me in. No! He is a man who murdered 5 people, one of them on live television. And he's in solitary confinement. And she's just walked up to the guard and went, hey, can I go in there, please? And then we have the worst, and like, I am typically when people are like, oh, we don't need a sex scene in this, we don't need a sex scene in this. I'm like, I don't care if it serves the narrative, like, in a way, like, fine. But, like, it is the worst and most uncomfortable sex scene I've ever seen, and I don't even think that's necessarily, like, a stylistic choice. I think it's written in a way that it should be a stylistic choice, and that it is written in a way that it's meant to make you feel uncomfortable, but the execution of it is just god-awful, and it doesn't feel like they're doing this as a choice. It's just the worst sex scene in the history of movies, of moving pictures, cinema, TV, anything. It is just the most uncomfortable and weird thing I've ever seen, and it's bad. We then later find out that Lee, Harley, checked herself in, and she grew up rich, and is just someone who sort of idolizes Arthur, like all the mentally ill people in Gotham do, and that she's been manipulating him and all these things. But then this makes it even weirder for later, when she is trying to tell him, and she believes that he will be acquitted for doing these murders on live TV, and that they will then start a life. And in the worst sex scene of all time, it's revealed that she's now pregnant, and she believes that there is a world where her and Arthur can run away and live together and be together, and he will not die inside of a prison, whether that's in like a year on the electric chair, or like when he just dies an old man in an asylum. Like, it makes no sense. And then when it's just kind of dropped in that she has a background in psychology, so I guess she's technically Dr. Harleen Quinzel. It's bad, and I don't like it. And as a portrayal of Harley, it's extra bad, because the thing that makes the portrayal of Harley so interesting to me is that she was someone who worked in the hospital and in psychology, and was a psychologist who was analysing Joker and was corrupted by him and manipulated by him, and eventually fell in love with him in this endless cycle of abuse and a horrific abuse of power, and this power dynamic that she cannot escape. But in this, she's seemingly manipulating him, but also not really, because she believes that he'll get away, and it's odd and it's awkward, and it does a disservice because it flips the dynamic on its head, that she's the abusive one and he's the one that we're meant to like sympathise with, when he's very clearly being manipulated and abused by someone who knows what they're doing. And I think that's a massive disservice to especially the sort of seemingly intentional efforts of DC over the past 2 years to portray Harley's healing from this abuse. And I'm not obviously not saying that men cannot be victims of domestic abuse. That is obviously not what I'm saying here. But Harley has become such an icon for particularly women survivors of domestic abuse, and to turn this character into a sort of mirror of the comic book Joker, where she's corrupting and manipulating Arthur, it's gross and I don't like it. And I like what Lady Gaga is doing with this awful interpretation in terms of delivering what was wrote on the page to the screen, but I think it's an awful portrayal of one of comic books' most important and nuanced characters, especially over the last few years anyway. One thing I forgot to mention in the start of the video is I fucking hate Harvey Dent in this movie, and we'll talk about the ending of this movie in a minute. I absolutely hate the guy playing him. He delivers everything in this movie like he knows he's in a movie. Like, everything he says to the jury, and I understand to a point, it's, as the lawyer, and it's like they're talking, this is the first case, it's going to be broadcast on TV and things like that. He delivers everything he says to the jury like he knows he's in a movie, and I understand there's the idea that you can go, well, maybe he's hamming it up because the TV camera's in there, but it's not even that. He delivers it in a way, a lot of the things he says is like almost panto delivery, in the way that an actor in panto delivers something for the crowd to kind of get involved with, you know? It's everything is delivered like that, and they leave it for like half a beat, like we're meant to have some interaction, and then he's like, no further questions. He's bad in it. And the thing I hate the most, because we're kind of jumping ahead in our spoiler territory here, but towards the end of the movie, the courthouse blows up, and so here's the thing: we're throughout the movie, it's Chekhov's gun, right? And for those unfamiliar with Chekhov's gun, it is the idea that in narrative and like playwriting and screenwriting and things like that, if you introduce a gun, if you say, "Oh, I've got a gun," one of your characters has a gun, and nothing happens with that gun, it is a completely wasted point, because what is the point in doing it? But if you tell us you have a gun, and then you kind of do nothing with it, we're always like, shit, when is the gun going to come into play? Who's going to get shot? What's going to happen? It's like Alfred Hitchcock and the baseball conversation. Alfred Hitchcock says, imagine a scene where two characters talk about baseball for 5 minutes, and then a bomb goes off and kills them both. At the end of that scene, you're going to be like, what the fuck was that about? Why did I just watch two men talk about baseball for 5 minutes and then explode and die? But if that scene starts from under the table, and we can see that there's a bomb under the table, and it pans back, and the same two men have the same conversation about baseball for 5 minutes, you're now absolutely gripped, being like, oh my god, both of these guys are going to die, and they don't even know it. All of that is to say, they introduce Harvey Dent, and they set up this whole thing. We set up the sort of descent of Lee, God, getting more and more mad and insane, and it kind of feels like, to me anyway, it felt like the ending was going to be, and I understand this is me just going, oh, I've read comics and I kind of know what's going to happen here, but it felt more and more like the ending was going to be some variation of Harley comes in, there's an acid attack on Harvey, tries to break the Joker out, or maybe kills him and herself, or they try and escape and get got, something like that. But a bomb goes off in the courthouse, and Harvey gets kind of scratched up a little bit, but it doesn't show us that. It shows us him with like kind of dirt and stuff on like the side of his face that was at the wall, like on the side of the wall that blew up. But because like I understand that it's there over half of his face and there's some scratches and stuff, because we know that's Two-Face, and they're doing that to be like, oh, would you look at that? But this movie is so dumb and hates comic books so much that I don't even, like, I wouldn't be surprised if we found out that no one knew that was meant to be Two-Face, and that's just how makeup did it, because they were like, we'll only have, like, there'll be more dirt and shit on this side of his body, because this side's at the wall, and I hate it. I hate everything about Harvey Dent in this movie. I hate the way it's portrayed. I hate the big ending. I hate the fact that they essentially do, what they do is they introduce Chekhov's gun and then it does not go off. It's like, imagine you introduce Chekhov's gun and then someone at the end goes, oh, really mad and I want to kill that guy, and now I've got the gun. I'm going to go for a drive to clear my head. That's kind of how it is. It acknowledges it. It acknowledges the thing that we expect, but not in a way that is satisfying or good to the narrative or the overall plot. Also, when the Joker becomes Joker in the courtroom, he goes all foghorn leghorn and gets kind of too big for his boots. So during his trial, he then starts talking like foghorn leghorn when he begins to defend himself. As Dave was being all belly big bollocks. It's you know, they bring in his friend, the little guy, Gary, the little person from the first movie, to testify, and he's kind of being all insane and stuff, and he's performing and everyone's cheering for him. And then he goes back to the jail and gets mouthy with Brendan Gleeson, and then gets attacked and then sexually assaulted in the showers by, well, it's implied it's sexually assaulted by the guards, and then he's dragged back to his cell, and Arthur's little friend, who we've seen a little bit, then then he gets like pulled out and killed by Brendan Gleeson. Like I said, Brendan Gleeson's amazing in this, but he's not a good guy, not a good dude. And I think then after that, after kind of being presumably raped by the guards, he then goes to court the next day, and for his closing arguments just basically says there is no Joker. It's all Arthur, and then his supporters walk out and kind of abandon him. And then he's found guilty of the murders, and there's a shot that maybe Harley's going to kill herself, and then the courtroom explodes, and he runs out. He runs away, goes to the stairs from the first one, meets Lee halfway up. Is that real? I don't know. They have a conversation. Lee's like, "Nah, I'm done because you're not Joker, and I wanted to live my life with Joker." And this might be a dream because the last thing we see her, she's got a gun in her head. But if it's not, then it's her being like, "I truly believed you were going to get off scot-free from this thing," and it doesn't make sense. And then he gets arrested again. And then the ending of this movie is, the end of this movie is something. And I think the ending of this movie starts good. And then there's a baffling decision in the last, 5 seconds of this movie. Which, God, it's bad. So then he gets arrested on the stairs after Lee maybe or maybe not walks away and abandons him. Arthur goes back to Arkham. The next day he's just kind of walking about. He's been found guilty of the murders, and he's going to die, whatever. He's going to be put to death. And then he goes to, there's someone says he's got a visitor. He goes to a guy who we've seen a little bit throughout the movie, who we've not really paid any attention to, so I don't get it. He's maybe said 2 things. We've maybe seen him in the background a couple of times. The camera's maybe focused on him once or twice. It's not a character that we know. Maybe obviously he had his one little friend who was killed by Brendan Gleeson, and that scene just after he gets assaulted in the showers. But this scene here is more impactful if he has 2 friends, and it's this guy who loves him because he's Joker, and he comes up and he starts to tell him this joke, and then it's a whole thing, and then he's like, "Yeah, well, you get what you fucking deserve," and then shivs him 20 times, and Arthur kind of goes and he's dead, and he's it's this thing that this persona of the Joker became bigger than him in the city of Gotham, and the people who feel the most disenfranchised in Gotham rallied behind this persona. For him to then be murdered by one of the people that idolise them is, I think, good, and shows the thesis of the movie, which is incel bad. And I like that. And then he gives himself a Chelsea grin whilst laughing hysterically because he's Joker now. It's just a truly fucking baffling decision. Awful decision. Because everyone knows what we associate that with. We associate that with Heath Ledger. We associate that with The Dark Knight. We associate that with... It's not the best Batman movie, that is The Batman, but the best movie about Batman, which is The Dark Knight. We're going to associate that with the peak of this character of Joker, and it's been shoehorned into an awful, awful, awful movie. And there will be people who will now start to look at that as the origins of this Joker, but it's not, because we have Harvey here, who got his face a little bit scarred, I guess. And then 20 years later, this is Harvey Dent Jr., who has a similar similar thing. And then in this movie, this guy's like 20. This is 2 years after the first one, so Bruce Wayne's like, what, maybe 13, 14 now? And they're obviously similar ages in the Batman, or in the Dark Knight, or Joker and Batman. And it's just a baffling decision. And apparently this was going to be the end of the first movie, Joker carving himself the Chelsea grin as like his last act on top of the cop car. And apparently it was shot down by Chris Nolan, who didn't want to dilute the potential of this movie by referencing something else, and didn't want his movies are standalone, this is standalone, didn't want these things to happen. And even though for two universes, I guess these things can happen, fans are obviously the same. So then he does he does his blood and makes a smile that way. But now Chris Nolan doesn't work with Warner Brothers anymore, so he wasn't there to be like, hey, I don't think we should do this. And it's bad. And the guy carves his face whilst laughing hysterically. So then, I guess he's now Joker for when Bruce Wayne becomes Batman in like 7 or 8 years. But this guy's not going to get out either, because he just murdered Arthur. And this guy's not going to become the Joker in terms of being a criminal mastermind, probably. And it's just a fucking mess. There are 2 setups for villains for a Batman who's like 14, 15 tops, who's not a Batman yet. It also, wants us to maybe think that it's going to be set in the Dark Knight world, which it's obviously not, because if it was, when the Joker came onto the scene, wouldn't everyone go, hey, remember that guy from the 80s that shot Robert De Niro on TV? The guy that killed him, did he not fucking carve his face up like this guy? Now we know who that guy is. It's him. Oh, it's just a baffling movie. Just a bad movie. And I like this movie. And I like it. I try not to be negative on this channel, or on all my channels. And I have just put out a 40-minute hit piece on the movie Joker 2. But it just wasn't a good movie. And if anything, this has really cemented my excitement for James Gunn's DCU. Because now we can just get this over with. This franchise is done. The Snyderverse is done. And I'm excited for just a new take on DC characters that aren't just Batman-centric. That's all I've got to say. There's a lot to say, but that's me done now, I think. So thank you guys so much for watching if you made it this far. Please let me know what you thought of Joker 2 in the comments. Like I say, I don't hate everything about it. I really appreciate the idea of taking aim at the worst aspects of its fans and the culture that the movie created, and the public perception of this movie and how this movie is thought of and spoken of. But it doesn't do anything with that interesting concept is my main issue. But like, listen, if you liked it, I'm not obviously. I just personally didn't like it at all. So let me know what you thought of the movie in the comments down below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. We're going to be talking about all things movies here, and comics, and well, I guess superhero-y stuff. I don't want to talk about movies in general, but I mean, the last 2 movies I saw in the cinema was Joker 2 and Megalopolis. Hey, there's another good thing about Joker 2. It was better than Megalopolis. So, yeah. Now, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you next time.